We have a short video. We've got a couple of videos today. We haven't got to one, which I'd love you to see, but you might have to go online later and check that out. But this one of my favourite case studies from the Male Champions of Change involves a rail freight company. So it's only a couple of minutes long. And meet Lance Hockridge, who's the CEO of Horizon.
I'm Lance Hockridge. I'm the Managing Director and CEO of Horizon. We, like so many organisations, to the extent that we do have females, have disproportionate representation in white-collar areas. And yet, as I look around the organisation, I continue to just be blown away by the capability and the quality of the women in the train drivers, who are network controllers, who are line executives in the business. The work that we've been doing is about how do you make that change? What is going to facilitate that kind of change? So in our case, for example, we have executive officer programs. I have a high potential female who comes and works in my office, for example, for 4 to 6 months at a time. One of the more interesting programs, in my view, that we've had underway is a transition to operations program. So we're offering specifically to women who are already in the organisation but in white-collar roles the opportunity to be able to be trained and make that transition into line management. That's why, putting all of that together, I think the emblematic stuff, the leadership from the top, from the board, from the executive management, provides that context, provides that, you know what, this is going to happen.
Of all the resources here, that's a fantastic group of resources from the Queensland Male Champions of Change. There's some videos, there's reports, some tools, some diagnostics and so forth. But you don't need a lot of resources necessarily to do this, is the message that we're hearing. So starting with those conversations, bit what we're doing today. Our next session, we're going to have a panel discussion to look at kind of delve into some of these issues in a bit more detail. Get some personal stories. Then we'll come back. We're going to come back to Poll Everywhere, seeing you all seem to really enjoy it so much. We've learned a lot. And so while I'm going to take a seat, is this where I was meant to be, Renee? Yes? That's good. I'll just move myself over here. I'd like to welcome our 3 panellists. So first up, Anne Gale, South Australia's Commissioner for Equal Opportunity, who has a very distinguished career, deep care about these issues of equity and so forth. And she's covered housing, aged care, consumer affairs, strategies for homelessness, occupational licensing. You're into everything. Come on up and take a seat. Please put your hands together and welcome Anne. Irma Ranieri, who we already know, come on up. And there's another bloke who's joining us, Roden Jenner. So these issues, these things start with a conversation. I mean, that's what I hear from people. When you sit down and have conversations and you start to respectfully hear each other's perspectives, are the most powerful things. So these kind of quite personal stories about. We've talked a bit about some of the obstacles. We'll come back and deal with some of that later. But let's look at some people's perspectives about diversity and how it actually functions in an environment, quite a difficult environment. So Anne, I'm going to just go to you. Tell us about your perspective and how you came to kind of feel how important diversity was.
Okay. It's a good question. And what I'm going to do is, I guess, you asked for personal insight. So I'll talk about, I guess, where I come from, and there's a few familiar faces in this room, so some people will know that I come from Whyalla and I grew up in Whyalla. And it was a multicultural community. There was fairly dominant English and Scottish migration, but also other cultures. And so I was aware of, grew up in an industrial city, very male-dominated city, in the sense of the boys did trades at BHP, or the shipyard, and the girls were either in the admin or became nurses, or worked in the bank. That was a credible career. So it was a strong culture in that sense. And I was also aware of Aboriginal people in our community, both their absence and their presence. And in that iron triangle, you know, the strong Aboriginal communities and an awareness of that, but also the awareness of exclusion around that, those peoples. And then as a child, I also was aware of the kids with disability went to the Plum Street Special School, and there was no integration. And I think those things, when I try and say what made me passionate about that, was some of this isn't right, and you just have to make a difference. And I used to have many an argument with my father about why I wouldn't stay in Whyalla and work at the bank. And I wanted to do other things and wanted to try and change some of that. Why couldn't I? So he thought I was pretty stubborn. But I think when I think about all of us will have what we grew up with and what influenced us, but they are very strong things that influenced me and what directions I've chosen in my career.
And it goes to show from that your beginnings don't dictate necessarily. It has a lot to do with it, but
they might influence where you go. Yes.
Correct. Now, Anne and I are the only two people on this stage who did not live across the road from each other in our youth. But Irma, you've got a very, I wouldn't say different perspective, but you've got a very powerful story of growing up as a kid from a migrant family.
Well, it's probably Anne's story, and I was the ethnic that was. So I wasn't born in Australia, and you know, the story around the Macedonian community that lived in Fulham Gardens and the market gardening and the rest of it. Well, my parents were those people, and in fact, very working class. And what I did realise is they had a sort of a stereotypical kind of view, in particular my father. So I have grown up in a very traditional household about what women should do. And what was interesting is he'd kind of treat my mother in a particular way but expect something different for his daughter, which I think is an interesting paradigm. I don't know what it is that made me quite driven. At high school, for instance, my pathway was around business and typing. I never was a good typist, but I'm pretty good. I'm quicker than some of the other people. And the barriers that started very quickly about what was a chosen path for me. And I have to say unequivocally, firstly, I'm really passionate about the public sector, but secondly, it has not been an easy journey because I actually like being a woman, and I like the difference and the diversity. I loved being a mother, still am, yeah, but they're still living with me, they're too old and they're still doing it. So I love all that aspect to it, but I can't understand why then I need to be treated differently. Why aren't workplaces structurally sort of and that's where my passion's been, you know that. And that's why I guess even starting to arrange something like today was actually have a different conversation about it, because it actually does talk about accepting everyone's difference and accepting people for what they can actually contribute gives you a different perspective. And I find if I don't go and find people that actually think differently to me, I'll actually believe everything that I'm saying to myself. And in fact, it's a great leveller. And you actually have to continue to remain humble for those new Australians coming in and for those that are marginalised by us. And in fact, that's why we're here. We're here as public servants to help people that can't help themselves. So in fact, if we can't even get it together and accept women in senior roles, and it's not about that, then how the heck are we going to serve women, you know, African, whatever it is that the public sector needs to actually embrace? So that's what's driven me and what's going to drive you mad as Commissioner when I keep sending out all the different things that I'm doing. So, yeah.
Roden, other than your great capacity for cooking, which is a way of bringing people together, what aspects of your background as a Bulgarian kid growing up in Australia do you now bring into your fantastic capacity to bring men and women together in a way that facilitates a different energy?
I think that's a really amazing question. When we're doing the research with McKinsey and showing that workforces that were ethnically and had that diversity were 35% more, had achieved higher performance, I thought, I'm not surprised about that. And I think about my own background that's enabled me to navigate, you know, my work around the world. We grew up across the road from each other, really, separated by Tapley Hill Road. And
well, we nearly got run over.
Deadly road.
And you know, I was lucky that I was really good at Australian rules football, so that got me in. Yes. The rest of the time I had my black jeans and black t-shirts, so I was sort of basically roaming around the western suburbs, not being very liked by certain parts of the community. And so that was a real tension. And it was a former education minister's wife who was teaching at Henley High who introduced ESL that dragged me out of the bottom class. I then managed to win a school prize, and then because of all this mixed up, crazy, ethnic, Aussie sort of background, I then ended up bombing, and then eventually, you know, teachers got me back in. Now, I think the interesting thing about all of that is the insights growing up. I grew up in a political family. My mother was an absolutely committed feminist, so it was always very early on having a role model there. Growing up, you know, obviously out of East European thing, you absolutely finally achieved politics, but also you know, she helped us set up the Bulgarian school, the dance group, all the cultural stuff, and we then navigated culture, and through the work of the Multicultural Arts Society and a whole bunch of other things, that's enabled me to get deep insights into a whole bunch of different communities, be they Italian, Greek, Middle Eastern, Asian, Indian, whatever, and that's been very powerful. And as I now journey around the world, working out of Denmark, Sweden, UK, United States, Singapore, Malaysia, this has geared me up to be able to sit down and have very deep and profound conversations around where people are coming from, and also in terms of religion and different cultural norms. And for me, I think that's been one of the keys to my success, is being able to walk through those doors around the world because of my upbringing.
Gordon Cairns, who is the chairman of Origin Energy, who was a very alpha type CEO, who kind of started to get it in one way. He's got a very powerful phrase, and he says, we have to remember that the organisations that we operate in were designed by men for a time where men were really the only people in the workforce. That women were very much, this goes back, you know, 150 years or so. So two things follow from that. We shouldn't beat ourselves up so much about trying to, you know, this is how it has to be, because it can change. And the second thing is that it's actually going to take men to help shift that conversation. So I wanted to get your reflections on that, both Maria and Anne, but also then to come into this concept of what we mean by merit. All right? And we'll come to merit in a minute, but if you can perhaps, do you see that? Because I think we all try and fit this structure in the workplace and so forth, forgetting that actually it can shift if we let it. Who'd like that? Irma, and then Anne. I'm not going to get in that competition.
Look, I'll be actually quite honest. I think for a long time I kind of, in the feminist kind of perspective, where we talk about, you know, male paradigm and the rest of it. And I think that the reason why people have stopped talking about it is because if I was a male, I'd be getting pretty sick of the conversation as well. Because a lot of men, probably the men in this room, actually all agree with us. And if they could, they would make that change. So I actually, and the reason why today is different is that it isn't necessarily about sort of saying, well, this is how it was structured and it was because men did this. It's actually a new conversation around, well, what are we going to do as a group, as a collective, and not just women leading that conversation. Because in fact there are a lot of men, that want to care for their children, that want to have that flexibility, and a lot of men are kind of rear-guarded into a particular paradigm that's expected of them. And that's okay if you're in the middle management group, you maybe be able to kind of juggle it. But when you get to that senior level, you know, the pressure on you as a male is quite significant. At least I can wear a red jacket, you know, or something, but they're all looking the same. So if you actually behave in a particular way,
there's ties.
Yeah.
So you should wear it more often.
So my my comment would be that I want to get away from actually, you know, and even the strategy. We're talking more about what are we going to do as a collective, because a lot of men in this room and us and women have got daughters and sons who have now seen a different generation of mothers who have worked in the rest of it, and we want the best for our kids, but we also want the best for, I guess we're in the public service because we want to make a difference. So that's my point, I think, about that. I don't think anyone genuinely, you know, let's keep going with what was 100 years ago and those bloody women, if only they were. I don't think that's the case. So I think it's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think the engagement of men and the leadership by men in this is the new sort of era that we're in. We see the emergence of the Male Champions for Change in South Australia, the Chiefs for Gender Equity. I think for those men, it is giving a greater depth of understanding of gender inequality. So I know many leaders, many men who will say, you know, I believe in this, I'm committed, I don't understand, I don't know how to make the difference, you know, what is it? So I think we need to go deeper and give all of our leadership teams the understanding of things like unconscious bias and how they will play out in the workforce. Coming to your point of merit perhaps a bit later, what are the things that they can do to make a change? Because we still do have lots of history, lots of unconscious bias, lots of stereotypes in our society. And I think taking up the point about caring, until we get gender equity in caring, whether it's for our kids or our parents or whoever, we won't see it play out in the workplace. So the permission for men to have the flexible work, to share in that caring, so careers can still progress for both men and women whilst they're caring. We don't have work-life balance, we just have work-life integration. And how you do that for both genders and in sharing that, I think is critical, and involving men and creating permission for them to be part of that will free us all up. And I think it's really important, and I see that interest and commitment from men now.
And that's some of the CEOs initially that I know signed up to that, certainly from the ones I'd known, initially did it because they thought they had to, and then the process of learning actually started to work on them. So quite powerful systemic focus on this now. Yes. Roden, give us an example of where it works brilliantly and you can move mountains when you've got really diverse teams and you're bringing Sweden and Denmark together on that innovation hub.
Oh, look, I was very fortunate that just recently I was invited to help open the inaugural meeting of bringing Greater Copenhagen and then across the bridge to Malmö in Sweden. And this made great sense because Copenhagen is a global brand. It is so cool, and no one's heard of Malmö. And the Swedes dissolved their ego into a collective productivity hub corridor so that they can be a part of the action. So there's a thing here about when people come together, there is genuine trust, genuine collaboration, put together, held together, glued together by values. In the case of Denmark, not to be the best for the world, but in the world that's driving their pharmaceutical industry and their renewable energy and green economy 2.0. And those values are shared. Those leaders came together, dissolved ego in order to grow one of the most innovative corridors in the world. That is amazing.
So you can.
Your question about innovative and diverse workplaces, I guess I'll throw out some accolades here to some people I have worked with in the past, but one of the agencies I've worked in, which is now Housing SA, deals with people from all walks of life for marginalised communities. And the diversity in our community, if you don't see it amongst the tenant base of Housing SA, you won't see it anywhere. And so you get exposed to the diversity in the community, transgender people, homosexual people, Aboriginal people, new migrants, you see it all. It's a starting base. And the engagement of those tenants and those people in the workplace has seen wonderful adaptable housing being developed, wonderful migration programs for new migrants, the involvement. And I think we don't look to our own home base about how well we can and have done diversity in South Australia. And I've worked there, I've seen it. The consultation with both the people from diverse backgrounds and the involvement in the design of services and, in this case, housing products, is outstanding. And I guess I have worked in other places since then and haven't seen it replicated. And I think it's because the business of that organisation has driven the excellence in the products. And that diversity does exist, and we can learn a lot from our own home patches at times and some of that work.
That's true. I wanted, because we're a little limited for time, I wanted to move to this area after I get that phone call, move to a discussion about when we all want to be chosen on merit, okay? Anyone in the room who doesn't want to be chosen on merit, put your hand up, let me know. So it's a really powerful, some things here, there's that table over there, I'm choosing you on merit for the noisiest table. So everybody wants to get there, we don't want to be a token, we want to do it on our own terms. One of the most powerful lessons I learned about merit was from Gail Kelly and the team at Westpac. And if you watched Westpac, remember Gail was the first woman CEO of a big bank. After she'd been there, they had quite good diversity, and after she'd been there for a few years, that started dropping away. And pretty soon there was only one woman on her executive team, and that was the HR director, and she was retiring. And they had a conversation saying, and Alana said, I don't know, what am I doing? Like, what do I have to do here? Finally, the board had a conversation with Gail, and they said, what's happening in your organisation? And Gail told me this story, okay, so I can tell it. And she said, it's about merit. They're being here chosen on merit. And the board said, and I remember this gentleman, what does that say about merit on your team and in your organisation if they all look a certain way? That started to get Gail thinking about this. She then started to unpack some questions about, well, merit is actually defined by a dominant power group as a rule. And that then opened up some other space for conversation. And it took a good 12 months for her to understand this, but that organisation was the first one to embrace targets in this country and really drive a diversity agenda. And I'm forever eternally grateful for that board for actually having those quite tough conversations, because nobody wanted to be picked out. But what can we learn about merit that makes us think a bit differently about this? Because it's so kind of loaded, you know, but it's not a fixed concept, yeah?
And I'm absolutely committed to people being chosen on merit, and I think the definition of merit isn't the issue, it's actually how we then apply that definition in our own organisations. And look, I'll take two streams of it. One is firstly in our human resource community, and you could actually look to 15 different agencies, maybe 30, and you might actually see slightly different nuances in terms of how that's applied. The principle itself remains the same. The other issue around merit is you are then trying to pick someone meritoriously on a job that was defined perhaps over many, many years, that requires certain skills and basically favours a particular group of people because in fact, you know, we might value technical expertise, and then we define that role a bit further because, gee, we like the way we look, so we might actually sort of look for someone like us. So in fact, if someone is in a senior leadership job and they're a male, the definition of what the role looks like starts to look awfully like what we've had for the last few years. So in fact, when you have that happening and then you say, well, I applied merit and I got only males applying and the rest of it, one needs to go back to the fundamental, you know, institutional definitions and arrangements around how we define jobs and then how we're bringing in, I guess, the diversity dividend into that definition. So the one thing that struck me immediately as Commissioner in my first few tasks was when we were looking for chief executives for senior roles, we defined the technical bits. We didn't talk a lot about leadership. And when we did, I actually got 70% women applying. And then it's actually the confidence, the difference between women and men believing they can and can't do the job. So merit in definition is fine. One needs to look at the pathway to merit and whether there is equality in that pathway, and I would say not.
And the practical application of merit. So I agree with Irma, you know, the principle is there. It's the practical application, it's the organisational constructs, it's how you go about recruitment. So it's how you implement that merit principle and really being conscious of whether or not it's biased in other ways. So, you know, there are real practical things that organisations could do when you're briefing the recruitment agency, for example, you know, demanding a 50-50, if not, why not? Asking that question. The women aren't out there. Well, yes, they are. There's plenty of them. Just go look and go further. So it's having a look at how recruitment actually takes place and the bias around, you know, what we're looking for in that person. So, you know, there's many a person who said if merit was working properly, we would have more women in leadership positions.
Given it's
so if there's something not quite working right, if we're not getting that, and we need to have a look at how we implement that merit
But what
principle.
would be worse though is if that you basically, you know, the KPI for the recruitment firm is get 50-50, but we're still going to go for what we want, and in fact it could damage it more. And that is they meet their KPI, they bring to the table, but we weren't that serious, we gave you the number, they still weren't, you know. So it's actually being very genuine about the best person for the job, and that has to go all the way back to, are you defining this job in the right way if you're truly wanting to make an impact in a particular area?
Oh, look, I think that's really important, and I'm so pleased that that was raised, because alpha males will employ alpha males, except just a little bit shorter. If we look at the new economy around things like collaboration, trust, teamwork, how to build those and extract performance out of them, this is really important for how we rewrite our job descriptions. 50-50 plus the rewrite, because that's what's demanded of the new economy. If we can't do that, we're not getting the best performance, not getting the innovative creativity out of the teams, and it doesn't matter what level you do and what sort of job you've got, those elements are really important, both internally for extracting information and then working cross-sectorally to build information into new competencies. That's where the new policy happens. That's where the excitement is, and that's what will continue to make South Australia leaders in policy, government policy, all around the world.
I had another question to go on that, but our time's up, which is lucky because you can see he's ramping up again, can't you? So it's
Really serious.
So this issue about what those qualities are, about team-based and so forth, but we'll have to wind that up here because we've got some more discussion and so forth to go. Really important issues. Thank you so much. Please put your hands together for our panel.